Too. Well, good morning again. My talk this morning is about living and loving books, my never-ending journey through the world of books. And I realized after I started writing this, about 6 drafts, of course, I realized that my whole life I've either been writing, editing, publishing, or selling books. And I don't know what Middleboro is going to bring, but at any rate, let me tell you a little bit about my love for books. And the first childhood books of my own were The Big Red Pajama Wagon and Peppermint. Not great literature, but I loved them to death, literally. They got thrown in the trash. So a couple years ago, I bought these at a flea market, and they're really cute. I also discovered books like The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame and The Secret Garden, which is probably one of my favorite books of all time. And that's by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Her description of the garden just triggered my imagination and freed me from reality into the magical world of the book, where anything is possible. Over the years, there's been a lot of video interpretations of the book, and I've seen them all. And they've all, my imagination far exceeded what they portrayed it as. So at any rate, so when I got to elementary school, one of my favorite things was our teacher, who read to us every Friday. Every week a new chapter to look forward to, books like The Little House on the Prairie, Little Britches, and other classics, followed by a trip to the school library to pick out a book, reading time, and then lunch. Well, one Friday I was so entranced by the book that I had found that I dug right into it. And after a while, when I looked up, everyone had left the room and gone to lunch, and I didn't even notice it. So by the time I was in junior high school, I was reading almost everything I could get my hands on, and spending almost every waking moment reading, including hiding out in my closet so I could get away with reading past bedtime. Then I decided to pick the longest book in the school library, which turned out to be The Last Puritan, a memoir in the form of a novel by philosopher George Santayana, 602 pages, and I read them all. In 1959, the movie On the Beach was in theaters. After seeing it, I decided to read the book that it was based on, written by Australian Neville Shute. I liked this book so much that I spent several months reading any books by him that I could get my hands on. I particularly enjoyed No Highway in the Sky. And Rick, if you haven't read that, you should. It's really good. It's an aviation classic. I've done the same with a lot of other authors. As soon as I find a book that I really like, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to get all these books. So my senior year in high school was my first experience with book banning. One of the books assigned to us in our AP English class was The Catcher in the Rye. And apparently nobody noticed that there was anything amiss with it, until one of the parents must have looked at it. But unfortunately, after the parents objected, it was removed from our curriculum. However, that just made the book more interesting among my classmates, and at least one copy was widely circulated with bookmarks for the juicy parts. My first 2 years of college were at Ohio Wesleyan University. I was planning on being an English major, so I took courses in the English classics. Kind of boring. But my sophomore year, I took a course with Professor Libuse Reed. I have to mention her because she's just an amazing, amazing person. This course married American literature with history, architecture, religion, and music. So you saw the whole context of the books. And this changed my life. I realized that this is what I wanted to do. One of the books that she had us read, another fat book, is Letters from an American Farmer by J. Hector St. John de Crevecoeur. And it was originally published in 1792, or 1782, I'm sorry. And after reading this, and this was a real hike to read through this, but I realized that how important it is to use contemporary accounts of life in a given era and not just rely on secondhand history. So I'm going to put the books out on the table if anybody wants to look at these. So after I took the course, there was kind of a meeting. I'm sorry, it was kind of a change in universities, and they began to start offering American Studies, and now it's available at a lot of colleges and universities. So after a hiatus for child rearing, I returned to college. I graduated from UMass in 1978, and later I received a master's in American Studies from Penn State University. My thesis was on the internment of German and Japanese POWs in Carlisle during World War II. And I interviewed by mail several German POWs who had been, well, not stationed there, but forced to go there, as well as interviewing several women who worked with them in a Carlisle factory producing tank covers. All of them are gone now, but their story is preserved at the Cumberland County Historical Society. And I was very fortunate to have someone who would translate the letters into German, and then when they came back with the answers, they would translate them back into English so I could understand them. Well, while I was working on my master's degrees, at least since I didn't have enough to keep me busy, I decided to open a used bookstore in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This is the bookstore. I still have 2 shirts. That's all I have. If I had to pick my favorite vocation or job, it would be being the proprietor of a used bookstore. They tend to become a community hub, a great place to interact with people, learn about them and their favorite books. Since there wasn't another bookstore in town, we seem to have hit on a real need. And it was so successful that we moved out of this smaller shop and opened up on High Street, which is the main street in downtown Carlisle. And our bookstore cat, Eleanor Roosevelt, who you can kind of see in the window here, she was one of our best advertisements. She would sit in the window, and when somebody went by, she would like go, try to get people. But she was so popular, and so many people loved her that when she passed away of old age, her obituary ran in the newspaper, the first animal obituary that they had ever featured. So, well, life doesn't go as planned. And due to a divorce, I was forced to liquidate the bookstore and sell my share of the High Street building. But although I had to close the store, I'm also happy to report that one of my former employees went on to open the Whistle Stop bookstore down the street, which is still thriving today. So I was fortunate to be hired by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, or as we called it, the PHMC, to locate, research, and photograph iron foundries and steel mills and facilities so they could be evaluated for the National Register of Historic Places. I traipsed all over Pennsylvania. I was in when they were, the steel mill was operating, and otherwise I was chasing around kilns from the 19th century. And in fact, one kiln that I looked at when I had to take photographs and everything else, and when I got back, I realized that in every line, it was stone, and every space in between was full of snakes. I'm really glad I didn't know that. At any rate, so, but that came to an end. I had to write up the National Register, criteria and all that. But I was offered the position of division chief for publications and sales, also for the PHMC. This division was responsible for editing, designing, and producing any books published by the PHMC and any co-published with other organizations. The division also published the quarterly Pennsylvania Heritage Magazine. And over my 17-year tenure at the commission, we published close to 97 books on history, archaeology, architecture, travel guides, even a cookbook. And I still have my cookbook. And since we were a small division, I edited most of the books myself, you know, and I got a real education in archaeology that I did not appreciate it until I really had to write about it. So the only controversy that we had during my tenure and is because of this book. It's a book called Canoeing on the Juniata, and we thought this was a very important book because this was a photographer that was kind of unknown, and so that wasn't a problem because I had to go before the commission, the actual commission that runs our agency, and so we had a little discussion because in this book there's one photograph. You won't be able to see it, but you can go look at it later, that shows some bare parts. And there was a little bit of controversy about whether or not we should publish such a book because they're not wearing any clothes. And but I'm happy to say that they said, no, it looks good, go ahead. Anyway. So in 2006, I retired from the PHMC, and Bruce and I moved west. Later, he took a job with the Corps of Engineers, and we ended up in Walla Walla, Washington, known mostly for its wineries. But I wrote a number of freelance pieces for Walla Walla Lifestyles magazine, mostly on history, which led to an offer to write a book for Arcadia Publishing to be titled Legendary Locals of Walla Walla. This book was published in 2014. Where's that book? All right. I also joined, while I was in Walla Walla, I joined the American Association of University Women, in part because they ran a highly successful book sale every February. They've been doing it for almost 60 years. And all the money goes for scholarships for women returning to higher education or having other kinds of training. And it's just and also they send kids to conferences on STEM and various other things. So somebody found out I had to use bookstore, so so they asked me to work on the collectible books area, which was a separate area where the books were all vetted and priced. So in the last sale that I was involved in 2025, we netted over $85,000 for their scholarship and grants program. Of the total, revenue from collectibles was about $17,000. But after working on collectibles at the AAUW book sale, I stepped down and moved to Massachusetts, and here I am. So I want to start by talking about some of my favorite books very briefly. And then I'm going to ask everybody who brought information about their book. You don't have to have the book. Just tell us one or two books is fine. And we'll be passing the thing around, whatever the thing is. Anyway, so some of my favorites, and these change probably weekly, monthly. Some of my favorite books are Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose, which is about the Lewis and Clark expedition. A Death in the Family by James Agee, or Agee, I'm not sure. Wolf Willow by Wallace Stegner, Country of the Pointed Firs by Sarah Orne Jewett, and The Secret Garden, of course, is on my list, and a book called The Great Bridge by David McCullough, who I had an opportunity to meet when I was at the commission, and that's a book about the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. And then The Secret Garden, of course. And one of my top favorites, if I had to pick one of them, would be The Outermost House by Henry Beston. And I've read most of his work now. And then a book of poems by Sam Hamill called Destination Zero. And before I open this up to have everybody participate, I just want to remind people that we have a wonderful book discussion group, and if you need to know more about it, I think you all know about it, but do talk to Lois Aldrich. And also, don't miss August 1st when Bill Howe is going to talk about The Boys in the Boat, which is a wonderful book, and I'm looking forward to that. So, who wants to go first? Tell us what there you go, Sue.
Well, the website said we could do our homework and find the book, so I did. But I belong to two book groups here and the Rainham Senior Center now. But I just finished reading Finding Me, the autobiography by Viola Davis. It is an amazing story of her resilience and fight to overcome a terrible childhood and to go into theater and acting, so I recommend that one. Going back, I loved Where the Crawdads Sing, and The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek about a librarian who went through the Appalachians. I love The Honey Bus, and the reason I do is because I'm very much a naturalist, and it's how bees brought life into this woman. And the one I'm going to recommend to our church book group is called Finding Margaret Fuller. She was a transcendentalist, and she was one of the kind of a founder of our faith that you use. So that's an excellent book.
Don't be shy.
I'll follow up on that recommendation for the book club because this month's selection, which we meet on Monday, is The Beekeeper's Apprentice by Laura R. King, and it was my recommendation. Unlike Diane, I did not come to reading early in childhood because I had vision problems, so I hated reading until one day when I was in Marin at a bookstore when I was in my 30s, and I sat down and just started looking at books. And so I discovered two authors then in this glorious moment of, oh my God, I've fallen in love. One was May Sarton, and she lived in York, Maine, and wrote about that. And she was a poet and a journalist and an extraordinary woman. And I recommend you read any of her works. And then the other one was Italo Calvino, and it was a very bizarre book called If on a Winter's Night. But I remember that extraordinary moment of just sitting down and being just intoxicated. So The Beekeeper's Apprentice is a series that starts with the implausible notion that Sherlock Holmes, in his mid-years, after he's retired, in his 50s, meets a very precocious, brilliant 15-year-old girl and takes her on as an apprentice. And so the series is written from her perspective, not from Sherlock's. But it's really wonderful, so read them.
Who's next? Well, I've given this no thought. I didn't actually realize we had to come prepared, but I just adore The Secret Garden and the Little House books. I love them. The Phantom Toll Booth, Tolkien books, Mists of Avalon, Power of One. I don't know. I mean, they're just kind of popping in. I'm sure there are others that, but yeah. And so, oh, How Green Was My Valley. Anyway, I that'll do it for now.
Two books that I bet nobody's heard of, but maybe I'm wrong. When I was a child, I had an aunt and uncle who very nicely took me and my two cousins off to a beach, which was like 2.5 hours away. And every time we drove with them, one would drive and one would read a book. And it was a lovely experience. And the book they were reading that I remember the most was called The Storm, which was just about an individual storm, but it was a book that first suggested that we name hurricanes. First that for women, but then eventually it's now for anybody. But I just remember that whole feeling of books that it brings together, and that reading out loud can be a marvelous experience. The other one is Freddie the Pig. I've never run into that recently, but Freddie the Pig was somebody, they wrote a new book every year in the 1950s, and my mother would read it, and then as I got older, I would read to her over breakfast, and it was the only time during the day I would ever see her. So again, it was a feeling that books are a way to be together, as well as to be with yourself.
Hi, thanks Diane for today. It's just wonderful. I'm always impressed with the people that speak here in the church. I know nothing of their lives, and then you learn so much. It's wonderful. Thank you. But I also have been a reader all my life, and that's probably because of my mother, who used to read 10 or 11 books a week. And when she passed in the attic, we found tons of those romance novels. Like she had piles of them. Piles and piles, and we're like, she read these? We never knew that she was reading romance novels, but I guess she was. But she also read all kinds of books, and so I think I got it from her. But one of my favorites was The Power of One by Bryce Courtney, and I just love that book. It still sticks with me today, even though I don't remember all the details. It was about a young boy growing up in South Africa in the time of Hitler and whatnot, the beginning of apartheid. And it's just so courageous, and it's just a wonderful book. And then the other one, which I always forget his name, the author, but I will, because he was new to me, William Kent Kruger, and he's from Minnesota, and he writes a series with a character in it, but he writes other books too. And one of his books that I love the most was This Tender Land. And again, it's about Minnesota and the native tribes there, and it's all based on his experiences in Minnesota. It's very good. And the other one he wrote, Ordinary Grace, which also was astounding too. So anyway.
Oh, the logistics.
We got it.
I have maybe three. When I was in high school, I read The Caine Mutiny, and in that book, there's a description of a storm. I was sitting in the school library reading it, and the description was so vivid that when I walked out of the library, I was astounded it wasn't storming. I couldn't believe it was sunny out. And then in my adult life, there's this one, The Art of the Personal Essay, which is just lots of essays from lots of authors from 1600s on. It's just a great book. You get to hear what people think from 4 centuries. It's just fascinating stuff. And then there's Stephen Jay Gould, who was a biologist, died young of cancer. Anything he writes is fascinating.
Jeff should get extra points for this.
So this is cheating. I'm not really a reader. I love listening to books. We listen to books a lot. But I didn't want to say anything till Mark said something, because he recommended a book to me that was just terrific. And it's called Westward the Night, and it's by Beryl Markham, and it's about Beryl Markham. And the reason that I liked it so much, I like aviation, and she was a pilot. The thing that's interesting about it is that she should be one of the most famous pilots in the world, and no one has heard of her. She was the first person ever to fly a small single-engine airplane headed from east to west across the Atlantic, and she did it successfully, which is an immense accomplishment back in the time that she did it. And her life, born in Africa, and growing up in Africa, trailblazing development in Africa because she could fly, and did. She was just an amazing woman, and I'd never heard of her before, but I want to thank Mark for recommending it to us, and it was, I didn't want to say anything till you already didn't recommend it. So.
My favorite book, I have 3 favorite books, but the one I love the most that I would recommend is called The Autobiography of Henry VIII by his Jester Will Summers. The autobiography, yeah. It's a big fat book. I loved every minute of it. I sent it to my brother and sister-in-law who loved every minute of it. And I learned more things about that man than any of us usually know. He was an architect, a mathematician, a musician, a painter, the list goes on and on. I had no idea he was talented for things than we usually know about him. And he was just, I know, the Christmas song, What Child Is This, Who Came to Rest? He wrote that music, and I had no idea. But he was a very talented man. It's a wonderful, humorous book, as you can tell from the title. I don't know who actually wrote it.
Anyone else? I'm holding this, so I'll say I grew up with Alice in Wonderland and Winnie the Pooh. My mother was a elementary school teacher, and then stopped while she had me, and then went back to school and became a children's librarian. And she was a librarian all through my growing up. I think some of my favorite books as an adult, well, The Count of Monte Cristo is a book I've read so many times. I can't speak French, but I can read French, and I just love the French of The Count of Monte Cristo. Recently, a book called A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Knowles. It's a long, epic book about a man's life held in house arrest in a hotel in Moscow for most of his life, and a very interesting book. During the revolution and afterwards. Anybody else?
Well,
Thanks,
I realized I forgot something, and that is when a book that you love or a book that's by a writer you love puts their book in a pretty package. And I wanted to show you a couple of examples of this. This one is Our National Parks by John Muir. Just a beautiful book. I'll put it on the table if anyone wants to look at it. And this one is on Through the Year with Thoreau. So right up our alley here. I love these. I mean, I feel like it's an indulgence to get a book that's so fancy. So, yeah.
Well, at some point, I was just going to, this might be a silly idea, but I know, and Jeff probably speaks more to that, but I think we're supposed to be having a shared network drive at some point, Jeff, on our, that all the congregation can get into. And I'm just wondering if at some point we can have like a drop, put in here the names of books you would recommend that you really loved, and people can
Good
sign
idea.
on. Once
Yeah.
and I think that's coming soon. I think we'll work on it.
Great idea.
Kind of following up on sharing that, except maybe with that next chapter in your life. One of the things that this town is sorely missing is a used bookstore. One of the reasons I moved here 12 years ago was because it had a little teeny bookstore. Now, I hate to say it, but about 3 months after I moved here, it closed. So hopefully that wasn't because of me. But that is a dying thing. There just are not independent bookstores. There are not really quality used bookstores. And I know there's a thirst for it. There's a hunger for it. It's just you have to have somebody that knows how to do it well enough to really maximize the outreach and the marketing to compete with the big boys. So keep
If
it in
anyone wants
mind.
to do that, I'll be glad to consult. It really is a community. That's the thing that's really important about those kinds of bookstores, that people come and they meet one another, they talk, exchange ideas, and
The library does have a used bookstore still that's open a couple of times a week. There is also a wonderful little new place called Blackbird Books, I think it is. It's in South Middleboro. It's right on 28, except it's tucked back in a parking lot so that you really don't know it's there. But she is extraordinary, and it's like half the size of this, maybe a third of the size of this room. So support them if you can.
Thanks.
I had a third grade teacher who every day would read us one chapter out of a whole huge series of books that she had when she was a child from roughly around 1900s, because people would come to town on a train and be picked up in a horse and carriage. So it was called Bunny Brown and his sister Sue, like go camping or whatever. And I enjoyed them immensely, but a friend of mine who was 1 year older was very disappointed when he found out that Bunny Brown was just his nickname and he wasn't really a rabbit. And also I want to tell people about the Westport Friends Meeting House book sale. It's just over for the year, but they will be back mid-July next year. It's the big fundraiser for this little Quaker meeting house in Westport, Mass. 50,000 books, 2 tents, 2 buildings, and paperbacks, cheap paperbacks under the sky. So if you love to read, you will find something there, and you will be supporting a good cause.
Thanks. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and a special thanks to Vi for picking up coffee. If you want to join us for coffee over there. And yeah, Sue?
My other book group read a book about independent librarians, and I loved it, so I just thought I'd mention it. It's called The Secret Lives of Booksellers and Librarians, and by all people, James Patterson, who you wouldn't expect to do that. And it talks about real bookstores around the country that are independent books things. And one of them is in the town where my sister lives, so I got on the phone right away and I said, Jewel, have you ever been in that store? And she says, yes, I love it.
Thank you. Our new music director is starting August 1st. This is a blank inside card for everybody to sign and say welcome. I'm going to put it on the table over there.
Okay, have a wonderful day
You
and
didn't get that.
enjoy some coffee. I'll put these books in on this table.
Just a quick announcement, just a reminder that there's currently a collection of men's sneakers that's gently used or new men's sneakers. This is on behalf of Walt's Mobile Closet, which is a nonprofit in our area that partners with organizations along the South Coast to provide clothing and, right now, much needed shoes, often for the homeless and unhoused population, but for really anyone who has clothing assistance needs. And right now they desperately need men's sneakers, all sizes, gently used or new. You can bring those to church on Sundays, or you can get in touch with me, Sandy Smiley. My information's in the directory. And we'll be collecting through the August 12th Sunday. Thank you.
I'm going to extinguish the light in the chalice and invite us all to take